G'day, I'm Yuki-san Dev, and in part 21 of this series, Unity for the Absolute Beginner, we will be going over loops and coroutines. Alright, so I'm starting to wrap things up here in the beginner series. There'll be a few more supplemental videos and then a game or two, and then on to intermediate Unity. So today it's all about loops and coroutines. There's a standard for loop, there's a while loop, a do while loop, and a for each loop. Each of these, of course, have their place depending on what you're trying to achieve, so let's run through them and then finish off with a little on coroutines. So looping is obviously, as the name suggests, is repeating, and they're all based on conditions as you would expect, otherwise they would never end. And of course you can have them unconditional as well. So I've got an empty project here, and let's make a quick empty called loops. And let's make a loops script. And attach it to the loops empty object. And open the script. Alrighty, so firstly the for loop. So the basic syntax for a for loop is the word for, then in parenthesis or round brackets are the three statements separated by semicolons. Then in the curly brackets is the code to run inside the loop. So inside the round brackets, the first statement is a numeric variable. It's usually a local declared variable, but it doesn't have to be. 9 times out of 10, it will probably be a 0 or a 1. This is the variable that will be used to count the number of repeats or loops. The second statement is the condition that is checked to see whether the loop continues or not. As long as it remains true, the loop keeps going. And the third is the action to perform after the loop has cycled once. Usually it would be an increment of the local variable. So let's put it to the test. Let's type in for, and then in round brackets, int I equals 1, semicolon, I is smaller than 6, and then there's another semicolon, I plus plus. Then a couple of curly brackets, and then let's just do debug.log. And in speech marks, this is cycle number plus I. Right, so we have declared a starting local variable with the value of 1. Then we are telling this loop to keep going while the variable I is less than 6. Then after each loop, increment I by 1. Then in the curlies, we want Unity to output a message saying the cycle number is, and then show the value of I. So each time this message gets printed, we should see the number go up. Now, what do you think the first number will be? 1 or a 2? Well, it will be a 1, because remember this code here doesn't run until the loop has cycled. So it will start increasing after the first message is printed. So let's save this and run. There we go. Got to 5 and then stopped, because as soon as the loop hits 6, the condition is no longer true and stops. Now, of course, your starting variable could be any number, and the increment could be any number, or it could even be a reduction. Okay, so now to our next one, the while loop. Well, we just did a while loop in the last video. A while loop is a loop that will keep running while the condition is true. Let me just rem out this code above. So it's just simply a while, and then in round brackets is the condition, and then in between the curly brackets is the code to run. So I could actually have the exact same result as the above code for the for loop if I wanted to. I could declare a variable outside the loop before it starts, then say while I is smaller than 6, and then in the curlies the same debug statement, and then increment I by 1 after the output, and save and run it, and get exactly the same result. But this is probably not how you're going to use it. This would be more for something like game flow. Let's say you had a spawner script, but you only want enemies to spawn if the game is running. So the while loop could be used. So let's say we have a bool that is either true or false, and it's called isGameRunning. Then we have a function for spawning power-ups with a while loop inside. While is game running, and then in curly something like instantiate power-up. So our while loop will only run if game running is true. So let's say the game was over and is game running becomes false, then the power-ups would stop spawning. You can also have an unconditional while loop as well, just by simply saying while and then true in brackets. But just be careful with these, because if your code has no end and it isn't structured right, it will lock your game up completely when you run it. You will quite often see while true loops inside IEnumerators with wait statements, like we did in the previous video. Alright, on to the next one, the do while loop. So the do while loop is fairly simple. It's just the same as a while loop, with the only difference being that it will run at least once, regardless of the condition. You probably won't find yourself using this one in the early stages. So the syntax is do, and then a couple of curlies, and inside the curlies is the code to run, and after the last curly bracket is the condition. So let me just ram this one out here. So if we were to have a local variable equal 3, then have a do while loop to say I'm running a do while loop, and then have the condition while I is smaller than 2. So the code will run and say the message, and then check the condition and realize it needs to stop, so it runs once. So if I jump out of here and run this, there it is. So it still ran once, even though the condition was already met, but it didn't realize it until it had actually run it once. Okay, on to the last one, the for each loop. So when you get further down the track, you will start making use of this one. You will be using it to access and manipulate lists or array items or search for things. So in the editor, create a cube in the hierarchy and name it enemy1. And make sure you can see it in the scene. Now click on the tag drop down and select add tag. Click the plus button to add a field and type in enemy and click save. Then click on the enemy1 object again and select enemy for your tag. Now copy that enemy1 object and paste 2 more of them in your hierarchy. And I'm going to rename them to enemy2 and enemy3. Also separate them in the scene so that you can see them all. So now we can use a for each loop to manipulate these enemies one by one. So back into the script. Alright, let me just ram this one out. So first we will create an array of these enemies. So in start, type in GameObject, empty square brackets, enemies, equals GameObject dot find GameObjects with tag, and in speech marks enemy. So this now gives us an array called enemies that will hold anything in the scene with the tag enemy. Now type in for each, and then in the round brackets, GameObject target in enemies, and then a couple of curly brackets underneath. Right, so in the round brackets here, we are declaring a temporary local variable called target to hold the game object from the array enemies. The for each will loop this code until it has reached the end of the array. In our case, there are 3 enemies, so this loop will run 3 times. Then in the curly brackets, we can do whatever we like to those enemy objects. So let's destroy them. So in between the curly brackets, type in destroy target. So this will systematically go through the array and destroy each object with the tag enemy. The background running would look something like this. So let's save this and try it. Boom, all enemies gone. Okay, now you can make use of the word break in a loop. Break will exit the loop completely. So if we go back into the script and put a break underneath the destroy target line, so now the first target will be destroyed and then the loop will exit because it's come across a break. So let's save this and run it again. There we go. Destroyed the first target and then stopped. Well, that's not very useful, so let's try something else. A better use might be when you were looking for something in particular, and when you find it, exit the loop. So click on enemy 2 and scale it up to 2. Just make it a bit bigger. Now back in the script. So now we're going to look for the enemy that has the scale of 2 and destroy it. So above the destroy target line, type in transform, and that's with a capital T, enemy scale equals target dot get component transform. This is to get the transform component of each cube so we can see the scale of it. Then type in if, and then in the round brackets, enemy scale dot local scale dot x is equal to 2, then a couple of curly brackets. So this is saying if you find an object that has the x scale of 2, then do what's in the curlies. Then drag the destroy and break lines into the if curly brackets. So this should find the only cube in the scene with the scale of 2 and destroy it, and then exit the loop. So let's save and run. And there it is. Enemy 2 was destroyed. So there you have it. So during the series, we will be making use of these loops to get more exposure to them too. Of course, you can mix and match them, you can nest them within each other, etc. But again, just be careful because these loops in any language can cause lockups very easily if they're not structured right. Now, lastly for this video is coroutines. Most of the time, these guys are used to slow things down. You remember how fast update runs, and for a lot of things, that's just too fast. So this comes in very handy for timed operations because unlike functions and update method, the coroutines use actual time. So let's create another script and call it coroutines and attach it to an empty in the hierarchy called coroutines and get into the script. Alright, so let's do something basic to start. Let's make a new IEnumerator by typing in IEnumerator timed message and empty brackets, and then a couple of curly brackets underneath. Inside the curly brackets, type in yield return new, wait for seconds, and then in brackets 2. And then debug.log. Here's the message. So when this is called, it's going to wait 2 seconds and then output the debug message to the console. And then it's done. So let's call this from our start method by typing start coroutine and then in brackets and speech marks timed message. That's the name of our IEnumerator. And let's save this and run. And there we go. After 2 seconds, we get the message. Now let's put one of our loops in there. Let's use a while loop. So above our yield return line, type in while, and then in round brackets, put true. Then a couple of curly brackets. Then drag all the code underneath into the while loop. So now this will run forever because our while loop is unconditional. And because we've got a wait in there, it's not going to lock us up. So let's save this and run. And there we go. Messages popping up every 2 seconds. Now, if you watched video 20 in the series, then you will remember we used the coroutine with while true loop for our shooter to fire bullets. The only way that routine would stop is if the shooter was destroyed. Alright, let's disable loops and coroutines in the hierarchy so that their scripts won't run anymore. Now let's do something else. Let's change the color of one of the cubes in our hierarchy over time. So create a material in your project and call it color. And change its color to black. And drag that material onto enemy 3. Let's also make enemy 3 object a little bigger so we can see it better. Now create a script and just call it something like change color. And attach that script to enemy 3. And open the script. Alright, so let's do a quick setup here with some variables. So we're going to need the renderer component to change the color. So private renderer, and we'll just call it rend. And let's do a public float, color index equals 1. Alright, and then in start, let's put the actual renderer component into the rend container. So rend equals get component renderer. Alright, we're all set to go, so let's go ahead and make an IEnumerator and call it gradual change. Alright, so let's do the code first and then I'll go through it. So let's do the while loop first. So while color index is less than 256, and then a couple of curly brackets, and inside the loop do yield return new, wait for seconds, 0.03f, and then rend.material.color equals new color, color index divided by 255, 0, and then color index plus plus. Alright, so the while loop will run the code inside it and keep running it until the variable value of color index is greater than 255. We're stopping at 255 because the normal RGB color channel max is 255. If you've ever used a photo editor or any application really that uses RGB color channels, you would have noticed that they go from 0 to 255. Then in the loop, we are setting our pause or wait to 0.03 seconds. Then we are changing the material color to a new color. The 3 parameters inside the new color are the RGB channels. We're only cycling through the R channel or the red channel, so we will be gradually changing the cube to red. That's why the other 2 channels are set to 0. Now, why am I dividing the color index by 255? That's because the color is between 0 and 1. It's the new way they do it now. Even in Roblox is the same. If you wanted to use the old 0 to 255 range, you would have to use color 32. But to use that, we would have to convert the variable to byte, which requires extra coding. Coming up, actually, I have a tips and tricks video, and this will be covered in that. So I'm dividing it by 255 to get the correct number for color. And then lastly, we are incrementing color index by 1 each time. So each time the loop cycles, the color index number will increase and the color will change. Okay, and lastly, let's start this enumerator in the start method with start coroutine, gradual change. All right, let's save this and run. Cool, cube is changing from black to red gradually. Now, if this code was in update or a custom function, it would happen so fast that you would just see it flick from black to red. So the routine slowed it down and made it possible to see the fade because rather than relying on frames per second, it's using actual time. All right, I'm going to stop there. This isn't all they're used for, but at this stage, it's probably all you might be using it for. I could be here all day showing examples, and we will be using coroutines more throughout this and the intermediate series anyway. So, a quick recap. The for loop is used to cycle or loop for a set amount of times. The while loop will keep running while the condition is true. The do while loop is the same as a while loop, only it's guaranteed to run once regardless of the condition because the condition is at the end of the loop. And the for each loop is for cycling through a list or an array to find something or deal with each cycled object. And there's a little more to coroutines than I've demonstrated today, but at this stage they're good for running something without following the frame rate of the game or just to create pauses. All of these items we will probably be using in the upcoming end of series games. Okay, so that will do it for me today. So I hope to see you in the next video.